Hi, welcome back to Focal Point, AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point. The network is the American Family Radio Talk Network, AFR Talk. And again, I just want to close the loop on what we were talking about in the opening segment where John the Baptist confronted Herod with his sexual sin. And he wouldn't stop. In fact, the verb tense that's used there in this encounter by Matthew indicates that John said it, and he kept on saying. It's called the imperfect tense in Greek. This is found in Matthew chapter 14, verse 4. Herod had seized John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been saying to him. And that's captured in the ESV. He had been saying. This was ongoing action in past time. That's what the imperfect tense does in Greek. It describes ongoing action in past time. So the implication there is Herod tried to get John the Baptist to shut up, tried to put a bag over his head, tried to stick a gag in his mouth, and John just would not stop speaking the truth to power, and finally lost his head as a result. And so I think part of what we learn here from the story of John the Baptist is we need prophetic voices like John's in our own day, voices that will not bend, voices that will not waver, voices that will not capitulate, voices that will not concede, but will stand like an oak of righteousness for the truth. Remember what Jesus said about John the Baptist when people asked him about John? He said, "What did you go out in the desert to see? A reed shaken by the wind?" And the verb there means to shake violently back and forth like a thin reed in the shallows of a pond or a lake, and the wind comes up, and man, that reed just gets whipsawed by the wind. Whichever way the wind blows, that's the way it's going to lean. And Jesus says this about John. Is that what he was like? And they would have just laughed, because the last thing anybody would have thought John was a reed that was swayed by the wind. You know, I've used this analogy before, this quote before from a French politician back in the 19th century. One time he said, "There go my people. I must follow them, for I am their leader." And so you got a lot of politicians today, just like Herod in Jesus' day, waiting to see which way the wind blows before they decide where they're going to come out on an issue. And John wasn't like that. You know, I read an article today about the evangelical church and its waffling and its wavering on the issue of homosexuality. You know, we saw that some with Andy Stanley. We saw that some with Louis Giglio. When the time came, when the heat was on, it was difficult for them to find a way to make an unapologetic stand for the teaching of the Scripture on the issue of homosexuality. So the pressure is enormous. We're watching the Boy Scouts just about ready to fold under the pressure that they have received from the gay lobby. Which reminds me, I got an email. This is interesting. Got an email. Remember, I gave you the phone number the other day for the, well, let me close the loop. I got to finish up on John the Baptist before I get too far off in the weeds here. So John the Baptist was not a reed shaken by the wind. He was speaking moral truth to political power, and he wouldn't stop. They couldn't shut him up. The only way they could shut him up was to cut his head off, which is a reminder to those that do have a prophetic role in our culture. Look, it's hazardous. It's hazardous to your health to speak truth to power. You know, I've even had to be careful about the people I invite on this program because I don't want to expose people that I care about to unnecessary risk. I know how vicious the homosexual lobby can be. I know how risky it is for people even to be identified publicly with me. And so I'm careful even about the people I bring on this program because I don't want to expose them in their world to unnecessary risk, because there's a risk when somebody speaks truth to power. But John was unflinching. He was what Isaiah called an oak of righteousness. He stood tall, stood strong for the truth until Herod came for his head. And again, I want to remind you of what Jesus said about John the Baptist, because this would have been a perfect opportunity after John had had his head cut off, would have been a perfect opportunity for Jesus to say, look, well, that shows you what happens when preachers get to meddling in politics. When preachers start sticking their nose into political matters, this shows you what happens. What a perfect opportunity for Jesus to say, look, what we're here to do is we're here to just preach the gospel. That's all we're here to do. We're not supposed to get involved in this political stuff. We're just supposed to preach the gospel and bring people to faith in Christ. And Jesus could have said, look, John shows you exactly what happens when you get off message, when you forget that that's your main task. When you start talking to political leaders and you start messing around and passing these moral judgments on their conduct, this is what happens. Look, John got off message. He wasn't just out there preaching the gospel of the kingdom. And now his voice has been silenced for good. That's easily what Jesus could have said. But is that what Jesus said about John the Baptist? He said no. He said this, truly I say to you, among those born of women, there has arisen no one greater than John the Baptist. No one greater than John the Baptist. So instead of rebuking John, instead of saying, hey, you preachers out there, don't be like John, be like the people that are saying we ought to stay out of politics and just preach the gospel and hunker down and stay below the fire. Jesus said, no, I want you to be like John. I want you to imitate him. Among those born of women, there is no one who is greater than John the Baptist. So tremendous affirmation of his willingness to stand tall and strong for the truth. Now, I got an email, speaking of the Boy Scouts. You know, I gave the phone numbers out the other day, and one of the phone numbers, the prefix was wrong. It was a typo on the sheet that I was given. Number, by the way, if you haven't called the Boy Scouts and would like to weigh in, here are two numbers you can call, and these are correct. We have this verified. 972-580-2000. 972-580-2000 or 972-580-2100. Got two numbers you can call. 972-580, either the number 2000 or 2100, and that'll get you through to the Boy Scouts. Now, they've been overwhelmed. The Boy Scouts have been absolutely overwhelmed. We're hearing from listeners that said, look, I called, I tried to leave a message. They didn't want to hear my message. Originally, they were recording all of the comments that were coming in. They would roll you over to a place where your comments could be recorded. Apparently, those recorder boxes are now completely swamped, and so they've just shut off even taking comments, but they are still logging the votes that people have. And we're getting information. I mean, we've talked about this from the very beginning, that the Human Rights Campaign, HRC, has put enormous pressure on the Boy Scouts, and their corporate funding is dried up. You got people like Merck, UPS, Verizon, Google, all of them have pulled their corporate funding from the Boy Scouts. And so it's impacting their bottom line. It's starting to dry up. And so tremendous pressure. Basically, these homosexual activist groups, HRC is all about homosexual rights. They have been putting enormous pressure on the Boy Scouts, and they buckled because they're running out of money, and they've had to fight them in court, and it's become enormously expensive. But I gave out the wrong number, the wrong prefix, and we got this email back. That this came in on yesterday. Here's the email that came in. Your program between 1:30 and 1:40, the Central Time, that's right, during this program, this is when we gave out the number, gave out our phone number as the headquarters for the Boy Scouts of America, and asked that your listeners call in and voice their displeasure. Can you please issue a retraction as soon as possible? Our customers cannot get through to us. And then the last note is congratulations on your large listenership. Please issue a retraction as soon as possible. And of course, I sent him back a very apologetic email, very sorry for your trouble. And I let him know as soon as we found out about it, we issued the retraction on air and gave out the correct phone numbers. But it's interesting to me. So don't ever think, ladies and gentlemen, that your voice doesn't count, that your voice isn't heard, that we can't make a difference. You know, here's a poor guy. The listeners of this program shut his business down. He said, customers can't get through to us. Please, I'm begging you, please issue a retraction on that phone number. We can't get any work done around here. So, again, my kudos to you. I mean, it's in the middle of the program, and you took action right then, right now. And that's just an indication. Here's a sort of an incidental testimony to the power that this listening audience can have if we mobilize and make our voices heard. So congratulations to you. And I just feel terrible for the poor guy that got caught in the middle of that. Now, when we're on the subject of gay rights, let's go grab clip number 2, Rob, if we can. This is a guy by the name of Chris Culliver. He's a backup cornerback for the San Francisco 49ers. And there's this shock jock by the name of Artie Lang. He's just interviewing him. This is Super Bowl week, so he interviews him the other day. And he's just kind of joking around with him. And in the middle of it, he asks him really what's a pretty serious question about homosexuals in the locker room. And here's how the excerpt from Artie Lang's radio program went.
We talked to Chris Culliver, who's on the San Francisco 49ers, great player, cornerback. And I interviewed him, and I'm doing my goofy interview, and I'm asking all sorts of stupid questions. And right in the middle of it, I ask him if there's any gay guys on the 49ers. And listen to his reaction. And to me, this is what the NFL is. Go ahead. And what about gay guys? Have any of them approached you? He can't hear.
Nah, I don't do the gay guys, man. I don't do that. Nah.
Are there any on the 49ers?
Nah.
Stop the tape.
They don't got no gay people on the team. You know, they got to get up out of here.
Can we stop
do.
the tape?
Can't be with that sweet stuff. Nah.
Really? Is that true?
Yeah, it's true.
But they might be able to play well. You're missing one of the most fascinating interviews in the history of
Can't.
Why is the tape still playing?
In the locker room? Nah.
Oh, okay. So they'd have to stay, keep it a secret.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm just hearing the tape in
come
my
out
ear.
10 years later after that.
So Chris Culliver saying, no, can't have that in the locker room. If somebody comes out as gay in an NFL locker room, he's going to have to get up on out of there. Just can't have that going on in the locker room. Now, he's joking around, but I'm telling you, the gay lobby landed on him like a falling safe. And he's an example of what happens when you simply tell the truth about homosexuality. I mean, the truth is, if you've got a guy in an NFL locker room and you know that he has a sexual interest in other guys, there is no possible way that is not going to affect the dynamics of that team. It's just a simple fact. That's why we don't have men and women bunking together in the military, because of the sexual tension. They have separate showers. There are reasons for this, because you're aware of the sexual tension. Well, Chris Culliver was forced to issue an apology today. He met privately with Coach Jim Harbaugh, who evidently laid down the riot act, read him the riot act. So he is now completely apologetic about the whole thing. And again, all he said, he just said, it's not going to work. It's not going to work in an NFL locker room have a guy be out homosexual. If he's a homosexual, he can't come out of the closet for 10 years because the impact on team dynamics and cohesion and all that. And you know this Monty Teo thing, that's just a bizarre deal. But the guy that came out and said he was behind the entire hoax said, look, I was in love with Monty Teo. I'm a homosexual. I had an affair of the heart, a homosexual affair of the heart with Monty Teo, and all this was out of my love for him. Tell me it doesn't affect dynamics.